Monsieur le Président, COVID-19 a bon dos, les deux doses. Aujourd'hui, au nom du COVID-19, le gouvernement s'apprête à voter une loi anti-travailleurs. Une loi qui remet en question leurs droits acquis, une loi qui, au lieu de les protéger contre les licenciements abusifs, les rend plus vulnérables à la merci du patronat. Mr. Speaker, sir, during confinement, our frontliners put their lives and those of their families at risk for the greater good of the nation so that there is no disruption in essential services. And the nation is ever so grateful to all these good people. Some of these frontliners work during night shifts. Some of them work overtime, work on public holidays. They work under difficult conditions, but they never cease to serve us with dedication. And today, Mr. Speaker, sir, how is this government proposing to reward them? How is this government expressing its gratitude towards these frontliners? Any worker who works night shift is entitled by law to get an allowance of 15% of his basic wage. However, with this bill, a worker will simply not be paid any night shift allowance for work done during the confinement period. This is how they are rewarded by this government. They work at night, they will get no allowance. For workers in the construction sector, in the manufacturing sectors, who have been forced to work overtime during public holidays, they were entitled to be paid up to 3 times the normal rate. Now, with this bill, they will be paid at only twice the normal rate. Worse, Mr. Speaker, sir, their employer can choose not to pay them the overtime and instead ask them to take time off. We are talking about frontliners, about people who work overtime in factories which manufacture the mask that many of the honourable members are wearing today in this August Assembly. They put their lives at risk, and now they are worse off having worked during confinement time, unlike if they had worked outside confinement time. And that is not all, Mr. Speaker, sir. If their employer wants to terminate their employment on economic grounds, their employer can simply seize the redundancy board, and the redundancy board has 15 days to give a determination. The employer does not have to negotiate with the representatives of the worker. The employer does not have to try to find ways and means to avoid retrenchment. All he needs to do, seize the redundancy board and pay 1 month's salary to the workers. What is 1 month's salary for an employee who has spent all his life working for a hotel, for an airline, for a company in the port services? And this is how we are going to save jobs in this country, by making it easier to hire and fire. And that is not all, Mr. Speaker, sir. The employer can also request the worker to proceed on leave without pay. First time ever in the legislation. An employer telling his worker, take leave without pay, and when you come back, we will take you on, but on different terms and conditions. So the employer actually loses all his acquired rights, all his temps de service, all his retirement benefit, everything. And this is how this government is going to reward frontliners. Now was the time, Mr. Speaker, sir, for this government to come with a safety package to encourage enterprises not to retrench people. Come negotiate. Let's try to find a solution. If you need to have less working hours, less working hours. If you need to take time off to go training, take time off to go training. If you are able to cut down overtime, cut down the overtime. If you are able to accept a pay cut, accept a pay cut, but keep your employment, keep your job security. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, sir, the government chose not to do that. The government chose to totally side with the bosses, the big bosses of the private sector. The government chose to look only after the interests of the big boss and not of the workers. And this is blatant, Mr. Speaker, sir, when it comes to contribution to portable retirement gratuity fund. From day one, the patronat was against the idea of contributing to that fund. May I remind all members, this fund is used to pay for the workers a gratitude when he goes on retirement, especially for those workers whose employer are insolvent. You have this fund there which will contribute, which will be used to pay for the retirement. And this fund is funded by contribution from workers, from employers. They were supposed to contribute as from 1st of January. Government chose to give them an extension till March. And now, with this bill, government is choosing to give them an indefinite extension. They don't have to contribute at all until the government decides time is right for them to decide to contribute. And what was the reason advanced by the Prime Minister for this decision? Because the private sector has a cash flow problem. The private sector has a cash flow problem, but what about the rights of the workers? What will happen to a worker now who goes on retirement? What happens if his employer is insolvent? What funds will be used to pay his gratuity? At the law precisely stand, government has committed only 350 million rupees as seed capital to fund retirement gratuity. Only 350 million rupees. What happens if more funds is required? Is government going to put more money? Are we taxpayers going to pay for retirement of workers instead of the employers, instead of the big bosses of the private sector? Isn't that a way for government to blatantly side with the employers and not the workers? Another blatant example de la largesse de ce gouvernement envers le gros capital is a proposal to allow an employer for the next 18 months to withhold up to 15 days annual leave. Why require workers to work 15 days extra? Why take away their acquired right? Annual leave is sacred. Workers need to be able to take time off. They may have valid reason to be absent. There may be urgent reason to be absent. For example, if there is a torrential rainfall warning and no one is there to look after their children, they have to take a local leave to stay at home with their children. They may attend a funeral. They may have to attend prayers. They may go to a pilgrimage. Or simply, they may want to take a break and spend some time with the family, especially during festivities. But now, this government is depriving workers of their right to up to 15 days annual leave. And this measure, Mr. Speaker, sir, applies to all workers in all sectors of the economy, irrespective of the financial condition of the enterprise in which they are working. So the enterprise may be making millions of profits, and yet the worker will not have their 15 days annual leave. And in return for all these anti-workers provisions, Mr. Speaker, sir, what are the workers of this country getting? Is there any guarantee that they will keep their job? None. None at all. This is why, Mr. Speaker, sir, trade unionists are right in describing this bill as a treason, une trahison envers les travailleurs de ce pays. And Mr. Speaker, sir, history will bear witness that the very first bill introduced by this government after the election was to curtail the rights of workers of this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, COVID-19 should not be an excuse for government to go on a spending spree. COVID-19 should not be an excuse for government to borrow more than its repayment capabilities. At the moment, there is a debt ceiling under the Public Debt Management Act. Every year, you cannot spend more than 65% of your GDP. And by 2021, you have to reduce this ceiling to 60%. Already, according to figures published by the Ministry of Finance, even before COVID-19, in March, our public debt had reached 65.5%. So we're already above the required statutory threshold. And now in this bill, the government proposes to get rid of all the debt ceiling at all. There will be absolutely no restriction whatsoever on the ability of this government to spend. They can spend the whole 100% of GDP if they want to. This is very dangerous, Mr. Speaker, sir. Any public debt is a taxation on future income. It is a debt which will have to be repaid, probably not by us, but by our children and our remoter issues. Le gouvernement n'a pas le droit d'hypothéquer l'avenir de nos enfants pour s'assouvir ses envies de dépenses gargantuesques. Mr. Speaker, sir, in fact, now is the time for government to show fiscal stewardship. Now is the time to show rigor and transparency in the management of public funds. Now is the time for government to be accountable for every cent that it spends. And the MMM has always criticized the use of special funds because of its opacity and lack of scrutiny. Once funds are advanced from the consolidated fund to a special fund, the minister can do whatever he wants with that fund. There's absolutely no transparency. You cannot, for example, during budget time, ask questions, scrutinize what are the expenses. It is there, it's been transferred to a fund, and the minister decides how this fund is used. But luckily, the law provides a limit on the amount which the minister can transfer from the consolidated fund to a special fund or to any other purpose. And that is currently at 3.5 billion rupees. With the proposed amendment, government wants to increase that ability to advance money from 3.5 billion to 15 billion rupees, more than 400% of its current level. This is insane. If you need to spend, put in the budget. Let the MP every year scrutinize it. Let we go through committee stage. Let us approve line by line what you're going to do with this money. But no, the government wants opacity. They want to be able to transfer 15 billion rupees from the consolidated fund, and they will not be accountable. This is a government that does not believe in transparency, a government that does not believe in accountability. And we know already that as from April, the minister has already set up a COVID-19 project development fund to finance major investment projects. Mr. Speaker, sir, how is government going to finance this spending spree? We all know that it will definitely increase borrowing. That is why it has removed the ceiling on the amount of debt it can incur. But that would not be enough. The government now intends to loot the central bank, dévaliser la Banque centrale. Already they have depleted almost all of the central bank's special reserve. Only a few days after the election, the government has taken away 18 billion rupees from the central bank's special reserve. Mais l'appétit vient en mangeant. Now they intend to turn the central bank into an ATM machine for the government. The object of the central bank is being amended so that the government from now on can use the fund of the central bank to finance all its expenses, to finance its fiscal measures. And worse, Mr. Speaker, sir, the central bank will be required to use our foreign official reserves to invest in special purpose vehicles. This is very serious. We are talking about our foreign reserve, money that is there to ensure that we have funds necessary to pay for our imports in foreign currency. In Singapore, for example, Mr. Speaker, sir, the government, the Prime Minister, cannot make use of accumulated reserve without going through a lengthy, tedious process, ultimately requiring the sanction of the President of the Republic. But in Mauritius, instead of making it more difficult for government to use this very important special reserve fund, now the law is being amended so that any time the government can get that money. We cannot condone such irresponsible action. Mr. Speaker, sir, buried in the middle of this 85 pages long bill, the government is amending the Pharmacy Act, a law that has absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19 because there hasn't been any medicine so far to treat COVID-19. Yet, this is probably the most outrageous of all the proposed amendments in this bill. And the Honourable Prime Minister spent less than 30 seconds on it. The Pharmacy Act is being amended to compel the Pharmacy Board to approve or reject an application to build a factory to manufacture pharmaceutical product within only 20 days of receipt of the application. And the Pharmacy Board is required to register locally manufactured medicine within 28 days of receipt of an application for registration. Mr. Speaker, sir, we cannot place a patient at risk due to inadequate safety, quality, and efficiency. If the Pharmacy Board were to apply good manufacturing practice issued by the World Health Organization, it would take months for the board to license any manufacturing plant. The manufacturing conditions are very strict. The board has in the past, even recently, rejected applications where these applications had been blessed by the Economic Development Board. Similarly, it takes around 12 to 18 months for the Pharmacy Board to license pharmaceutical products before they can be sold and distributed to the public, which is normal because public safety doesn't have a price. You need to make sure that the medicine that you're being distributed and sold to the public is fit for human consumption. And now we are being asked today to vote a tailor-made legislation to enable an applicant to get a license to build a factory and to sell locally produced drugs. Worse, Mr. Speaker, sir, the board is given the power to exempt any locally manufactured pharmaceutical product from registration. In other words, this person, when he gets his building plant, which takes only 20 days, and we're talking about members having to approve an application, members who have no technical knowledge about construction, who need to ensure that all the health and safety precautions have been taken, all the sterilization process are there, only 20 days for part-timers. And then once this gentleman will get his license to manufacture drug, the board can tell him, okay, you know, manufacturing this drug, you don't have to register it with us. For imported medicine, it takes us between 12 and 18 months to get a license, even though these medicines are registered in the US or in the European Union. But for locally manufactured, there will be no need to register. How can the government come up with a legislation like this? I really don't understand. And why do they put it buried among 55 legislation that we have to vote? This is a very dangerous piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, turning briefly to the quarantine bill. We agree that there is a need to update our existing legislation in that respect. But we should always bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, sir, that quarantine and confinement is a restriction on our freedom of movement, and any restriction on our constitutional rights must be reasonably justifiable in a democratic state. The bill, as it currently states, gives very wide powers to the minister concerned to issue regulations, to restrict movement, to force people to go to quarantine, to force people to give up samples. That has to be checked against the yardstick of reasonable requirement, reasonable justification in a democratic society. And for example, when there was a breach of the curfew and lawyers were prevented from meeting their clients in the police station, the case went to the aggrieved lawyer decided to lodge a case before the Supreme Court. And it's very unfortunate that before Mr. Justice Balanci had a chance to give a determination, government promptly amended the legislation to provide that lawyers don't need to have the work access permit to go and see their client in a police station or to go to court. Similarly, doctor doesn't need this permit to go and see their patient. But by doing so, the government somehow have deprived us of the benefit of getting guidance from the Supreme Court as to what are the parameters of any regulation to be introduced by the government under the quarantine bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, people out there are very worried about the quarantine bill, especially the provision which give extensive powers to the police. Power given to the police to enter premises without warrant. They are worried of possible abuse by the police. And unfortunately, we have seen how some, not all, but some police officers have abused of their existing powers during confinement. We have seen in social media police officers going and filming how they were abusing Mauritians, how they were hurting Mauritians, insulting Mauritians. And they were so proud to put that on the website, on social media. I don't know what happened to these police officers, if they've been interdicted, if they have been sentenced in a police cell. But this has created a psychose dans la population. And the population doesn't want to give police unrestricted access to their premises. And I'm going to make an appeal to the government. We already have the Police Act. Section 14 of the Police Act, for example, Mr. Speaker, sir, allows where, in case of urgency, communication with a magistrate will cause delay that would defeat the end of justice. A police officer not below the rank of an assistant superintendent may, on sworn information that the person is unlawfully in possession of drug, because this is in case of drug, he can issue a warrant. So I think we need to have a similar kind of garde-fou in this bill, that a police officer cannot just come in a house without a warrant. If it is not practicable to get the warrant from the magistrate, at least get an officer of police not below the rank of assistant superintendent to issue this permission, this warrant to search the premises. Mr. Speaker, sir, most of the proposed amendment in the bill relates to extension of delays which fell during the confinement periods, delays to make payments, delay to renew license, delay to lodge appeals. We have absolutely no issues with those provisions. But unfortunately, the bill also contains provision which goes against the rights of workers, against good governance, against prudential practice, against fundamental human rights, and we cannot possibly condone such provision. To paraphrase the Honourable Prime Minister, the pill is too big for the population to swallow. Thank you.